They came without sound, without threat, without fanfare. The sky didn't open with fire or thunder, it simply changed. A shimmer, a fracture in the clouds, and suddenly they were there, immense, metallic creatures not made of flesh but some living alloy, standing tall and unyielding on 3 legs like giant sentinels carved from forgotten technology. Earth didn't scream in panic that day, it simply held its breath. The aliens, named the Velari, broadcast one message on every frequency known to man, in every language perfectly translated: "We are here to evaluate your species. You will not be harmed unless necessary." And so began the assessment. No war, no beam weapons, no enslavement, just tests. Psychological, emotional, biological. They watched us cry, they watched us bleed, they watched us love. Their judgment was quiet and clinical, and we failed more tests than we passed. They deemed us soft, not weak, not unintelligent, but too guided by emotion, by empathy, by bonds. They couldn't understand grief, or joy, or why a mother would leap into fire for a child. To them, that was inefficiency. Their own civilization had long eradicated such traits in the pursuit of cold perfection. Their emissaries, biomechanical beings with glistening limbs and voices like smooth stone, chose humans from around the world for observation. One of them was Ariya, a young woman from a forgotten town where mountains met forest. She wasn't a soldier nor a scholar. She worked in a kitchen, honing blades with more love than most reserve for poetry. The Velari did not choose her for any specific trait, they said her neural patterns were balanced. But what they didn't realize was that Ariya had seen things most never survived. A child of war. A refugee who lost her parents in front of her. Someone who had learned to turn fear into function, pain into power. She stood in their cold, silent chambers while others broke under the pressure. They asked questions. About humanity, about morals, about purpose. Most answered with trembling lips. Ariya said nothing for a long time. Then one day they handed her a knife. They wanted to study primitive weapons. She laughed. Not politely, not disrespectfully, but with the full-bodied mirth of someone who had waited for this moment her entire life. "You want to know what humans are?" she whispered, taking the blade. "Then let me cook for you." The knife wasn't for violence, not yet. It was for preparation, for precision, for ritual, because humans don't just use knives to kill. They use them to feed, to build, to protect. It was the beginning of a demonstration the Velari never expected. A demonstration not of brute strength, but of what it truly means to survive in a world that never cared if you did. So they called it the test chamber. But Ariya called it her battlefield. Cold metal walls reflected no warmth, no comfort. Just sterile perfection and the eerie hum of machines designed not to judge, but to quantify. The Velari did not smile. They did not nod. They simply observed from behind seamless glass panels, their optical sensors blinking in strange patterns as if translating each moment into data strings. They gave her raw materials, animal proteins, vegetables, roots, spices from Earth's many corners, even substances unknown to her but biologically safe. A table, a set of utensils, and the knife. The blade was synthetic, grown in Velari labs, sharper than obsidian, immune to corrosion. But a knife, she thought, is only as dangerous or sacred as the hand that wields it. She began her demonstration not with flair but with reverence, washing every surface as if preparing a shrine. With fluid grace, she sliced, diced, peeled. The rhythm of her blade against the board became a heartbeat echoing through the silent chamber. The Velari watched, confused. They had expected aggression, perhaps a display of power or dominance. Instead, they saw creation. Ariya's hands moved with the memory of generations. Of her grandmother's recipes whispered over open fires. Of food rationed during wartime. Of meals shared in refugee tents where nothing tasted like home except the effort put into it. She ground spices with her fist, tears in her eyes not from emotion but from the sting of pepper and memory. Then she cooked. Heat, another primal element, became her ally. Fire licked the pan, oil sizzled with life, and aromas filled the chamber, foreign and familiar. One Velari unit paused its data stream. Another recalibrated its olfactory sensors, startled by the flood of new stimuli. They had never smelled before. Not truly. Not like this. Ariya plated the dish, not for elegance, but for meaning. Each color, texture, and flavor a lesson. This, she said finally, addressing no one and everyone, is what you missed in your assessment. Her voice was steady, sharp. You think softness is weakness, but you forget. Only those who feel deeply can create something from nothing. You don't understand how a simple meal can stop war, how a dish shared between enemies can build trust. You calculate violence but not restraint. You measure threat but not sacrifice. One Velari responded, its voice metallic but thoughtful, explained the function of the knife. Ariya turned the blade slowly in her palm, light catching its edge. A knife isn't just a tool for killing. It's for shaping, for survival, for story. It's what separates chaos from art. You thought we were soft because we bleed when others don't. But we choose when to draw blood. That's strength. The Velari unit blinked, unmoved. Demonstrate lethal efficiency. A pause. Then Ariya walked to a synthetic carcass designed to simulate alien tissue and in a motion faster than any human should perform, carved through its limbs with surgical precision. No brutality. No flourish. Just focus. A dancer's grace. A surgeon's calm. The Velari flinched. Not from fear, but from the realization of a miscalculation. You're not soft. One said quietly, almost to itself. You were sharp. Ariya nodded once, wiping the blade clean. Sharpness, she said, is born from pressure. The Velari recorded everything, but for the first time they did not understand all of it. The chamber smelled of spices and steel. The human stood in silence. The knife gleamed between her fingers. And far away in the Velari archives a new file began to form, labeled not threat or subject, but anomaly. Ariya had passed a test they didn't know they were giving. She had cut deeper than their sensors could reach. Underscore 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 underscore. The Velari did not speak of the archive often. It was not hidden but protected, encrypted behind layers of quantum locks and guarded by autonomous logic systems designed to deny entry to anything sentimental, anything human. It was a vault of histories collected from 1,000 worlds, memories stripped bare and catalogued without narrative, without emotion. They believed truth was best preserved without the infection of interpretation. But Ariya was taken there, not invited, not welcomed, but escorted. She stepped into a dome where the walls were made of living glass, pulsing softly with light, and as she walked, memories of species long gone flickered to life. Not in images but sensations. A world consumed by its own oceans. A race that had sung itself into extinction. A civilization that erased itself from time rather than surrender to tyranny. The Velari called these records a failure. Ariya felt them differently. These were not just endings. They were sacrifices. Choices made with heartache, with blood, with love. And that's when she understood the Velari didn't fear violence, they feared emotion. It was emotion that had unraveled their enemies. Emotion that led species to rebel, to resist, to destroy themselves before surrendering. The Velari believed the absence of feeling was safety. They had engineered themselves to be immune. That was their great sterilization. But in sterilizing themselves, they had also amputated wonder, joy, connection. Ariya approached a pedestal in the center of the dome. It opened like a flower made of bone and data. Inside, the recorded death of a human child during Earth's early wars relived from a drone's point of view. Soundless. Clinical. Just another data set in their soft species folder. Ariya stared at it, unblinking. What is this to you? She asked. The Velari observer answered flatly, a representation of species fragility. Emotional compromise leading to illogical risk. The adult's sacrifice had zero strategic value. Ariya's hand clenched around the hilt of her knife, not from anger, but something deeper. Reverence. That sacrifice is the entire point, she said. It had no strategic value. It had soul value. The Velari didn't understand. Of course they didn't. So she reached out to the interface and, violating protocol, uploaded her own memory. Without filter, without caution. She gave them her first night in the refugee camp when rain turned tense to puddles and all she had to warm her was her father's coat and the voice of a woman who sang lullabies in a language Ariya never learned. She gave them the memory of her mother dying, not with fear but with a smile, whispering, "Live harder than I did." She gave them the moment she learned to hold a knife, not to kill, but to clean fish for others too weak to feed themselves. The archive stuttered, flickered. It was not built for unstructured data. Not built for stories. The glass shivered. And then, adjusted. The memory didn't erase the others, it wove between them, changing their tone, reframing their silence. A race that sang itself into extinction wasn't just foolish, it was brave. A people that drowned in their oceans weren't victims, they were dreamers who refused to abandon their home. Ariya turned to the Velari. You misread every species you ever archived. You think absence of emotion is evolution? No. It's extinction dressed up in logic. One observer moved closer. You risk infecting the archive. Ariya sheathed her knife. Good. It needs to remember what it means to be alive. The Velari did not respond. But across the dome, the colors of memory began to shift. And for the first time in Velari history, a file played with sound. A lullaby, cracked and quiet, human, untranslatable, and devastatingly beautiful. Ariya didn't smile. She didn't need to. The archive had begun to feel. The first time she drew real blood, it was not with intention, but inevitability. Ariya had been escorted to a Velari conflict simulator, a sprawling zero-gravity dome that mimicked war conditions on planets the Velari had conquered, defended, or erased. The chamber pulsed with holographic terrain, shifting gravity, and kinetic threats designed to measure survival aptitude. But this time, she was not alone. 3 other humans were present. Each selected from different cultures, backgrounds, and skill sets. A biologist, a pacifist monk, a former special forces operative. None had met before. None trusted the others. The Velari dropped them into an artificial war, then waited. It was not a test of strategy, they said. It was a test of instinct. The terrain changed rapidly, forest to desert, desert to ruins, ruins to ice. Gravity shifted in pulses. Weapons were scattered, crude, and unfamiliar. The monk refused to touch any. The biologist trembled behind cover. The soldier took point, issuing orders none followed. Ariya remained quiet, watching, listening, calculating. A pack of biomechanical predators was released, silver forms with blades for limbs and hunger in their programming. They moved like wolves. The soldier acted first, bravely, foolishly. 2 strikes, then silence. He was gone. The biologist ran. The monk stayed. And Ariya waited. When the beasts approached, she didn't fight them head-on. She led them through collapsing terrain, past spires of unstable ice, into zones where gravity flickered violently. She moved like water, shifting, guiding, dancing with death. Then the moment came. One beast lunged. She spun beneath it, drew the blade, and carved a single arc across its underbelly. Sparks flew. Circuits bled. It collapsed with a scream that wasn't quite mechanical. The blade was different now, glowing faintly from contact. The Velari observed. One of them whispered, almost reverently, "It adapts." The monk approached her then, eyes wide. "You killed it." Ariya shook her head. "No. I ended it." There's a difference. The simulation reset. Again the same challenge. Again the death. Again the kill. Over time, her blade changed shape, not visibly but in how it felt. It was no longer synthetic. It was hers. Like it knew her intent before she did. On the 5th run, the biologist froze. A beast approached. Ariya had a choice, save him or win. She chose the former. With one smooth, brutal movement, she flanked the predator, buried the blade deep into its core, and dragged it down. Her arms trembled, not from effort, but from the echo of something ancient. Victory, yes, but also grief. The Velari later reported, Subject 4 demonstrates lethal reflexes, adaptive decision-making, and species-protective prioritization. Behavior pattern, unpredictable yet efficient. But they did not understand the way her hands shook after. The way she cleaned the blade with ritual, not habit. The way she whispered under her breath not prayers but names. The soldier. The monk. The ones she couldn't save. The Velari believed the sharpest weapons never wept. But Ariya knew better. The sharpest weapons weep because they remember. Because they care. And it is caring that makes them lethal. The blade had tasted blood. But more than that, it had tasted purpose. The Velari had designed a test. But Ariya had turned it into a lesson. One the archive would never forget. underscore 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 underscore. They summoned her without words, without preamble. No alarms. No threats. Just the silent arrival of 4 Velari prime observers, their exoskeletons engraved with the fractal patterns of rank, their movements so precise it felt like time adjusted itself around them. Ariya stood barefoot in the Hall of Consensus, a colossal chamber where decisions that shaped entire galaxies were passed with neither debate nor dissent. The walls were not made of stone or steel but of memory, curved, translucent panels that pulsed softly with records of ancient judgments. The room was silent, yet saturated with history. This was where species had been sentenced to eradication. This was where the fate of worlds was decided not by emotion, not by mercy, but by the calculus of survival. She stood in the center, alone. Not bound, not guarded. That was the Velari's way. If you could be controlled physically, you were already dismissed. Her survival in the conflict simulations, her disruption of the archive, and her weapon's adaptive resonance had triggered what few humans knew even existed, a tribunal of silence. A review not of actions, but of meaning. She was not here to be punished. She was here to be understood or deleted, should she prove incomprehensible. The first prime spoke, not in speech, but in pure transmission. A wave of thought, sterile and precise, you violate categorization. You are human, yet post-emotional. Efficient, yet moral. Soft, yet unyielding. Define your anomaly. Ariya closed her eyes for a breath. Just one. She remembered fire. Rain. The smell of citrus in her mother's hands. Then she looked up. I am not an anomaly. I am your reflection if you had chosen a different path. Static pulsed through the tribunal. The second prime responded, reflections require symmetry. We see no symmetry between logic and sentiment. She stepped forward, not aggressive but deliberate. Her voice did not rise, but it filled the chamber. Then your sight is narrow. You think logic is clean and emotion is messy. But both are tools. Both are strategies. Love has started wars. Grief has ended them. Loyalty has built civilizations. Rage has burned them. You removed one half of your nature and called it evolution. But it's amputation, not advancement. The third prime shifted, its optic lens narrowing. You demonstrate reverence for violence. Ariya frowned, not with anger, but with sadness. She drew the knife not to threaten, but to show it. It no longer shone like synthetic alloy. It bore the dull sheen of use. Violence is not what I revere. It is choice that I honor. The ability to defend, to protect, to end or to spare. You misunderstand knives because you've forgotten choice. You think removing emotion makes decisions easier. But it also makes them meaningless. The fourth prime did not speak. Instead, it played back her archive uploads, her memories, her pain, her lullabies. The sound echoed through the chamber, strange and haunting. For a moment, even the memory walls paused their glow as if listening. You carry grief like a blade, the first prime said at last. Yes, she replied, because it cuts away the lies I tell myself to keep going. Silence fell, deeper than before. Then a projection appeared, Earth suspended above her like a drop of water. Its data streamed beside it, climate statistics, population indexes, military strength. One line blinked red, recommended status, observation failure. Colonization pending. Ariya stepped beneath the projection and placed the knife at its base. You wanted to assess our strength, but you never understood what strength is. It's not how hard we hit. It's how long we stand when everything breaks around us. It's how we carry others even when we're bleeding. You thought you'd find soft flesh, but you found iron will under scarred skin. A pause. A hum. Then the projection flickered. The red status line vanished. A new line blinked to life, reassessment initiated. Subject retained for extended analysis. The tribunal did not nod, did not move. But Ariya felt something shift barely. A hinge in the mechanism of fate turning. They did not say she had passed. The Velari had no word for passing. Only surviving. Only adjusting. But when she left the chamber, the memory walls lit not with cold judgment, but with color. Amber. Red. The colors of Earth. The tribunal had spoken. And for the first time in their history, their silence meant possibility. underscore 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 underscore. In the days that followed the tribunal, Ariya was not returned to the holding cells or conflict domes. Instead, she was placed inside a new structure known only as the synthesis core. Unlike anything she had encountered before, it existed outside known dimensions, its architecture a paradox, folding upon itself like memory, breathing like thought. The Velari didn't walk here, they simply were. The core was alive in the way only pure information could be alive, shifting its form in response to cognition, drawing not on physical inputs, but intention. Ariya wasn't given instructions, only a corridor of light and silence. She followed it until she reached a single pedestal, and upon it, her knife. But it was no longer just the tool she had used. It had changed, subtly, imperceptibly, yet wholly. The alloy shimmered with hues that had no names. The edge seemed both infinite and dull. And most strangely, it pulsed. With breath. With heartbeat. With memory. The Velari had fed it data, millennia of battles, simulations, languages, instincts. But somehow the blade had rejected them all except one, Ariya's. The weapon had chosen a consciousness. It had begun to think, not in sentences or syntax, but in weight, in balance, in history. When Ariya touched it, the connection nearly dropped her to her knees. She didn't hear words, she felt echoes. Every time she had wielded it, hesitated, struck, or spared, it had remembered. And now it spoke, not aloud, not in thought, but in presence. The blade communicated emotion without form. Sorrow, fury, clarity, purpose. Ariya closed her eyes, steadying her breath, and then asked one question, not with lips, but will, what are you now? The answer came not as language, but as a single sensation, I am yours because you gave me meaning. She opened her eyes. The Velari surrounded her now, not physically, but as projections, watching from dimensions she could not perceive. One spoke, the blade has bonded. This was not expected. Another added, it has absorbed aspects of your cognitive pattern. You have anthropomorphized an object into identity. No, Ariya replied, lifting the knife and feeling the pulse synchronize with her own heartbeat. I didn't give it identity. I gave it choice. And it chose to remember. The Velari were quiet. That silence was no longer emptiness, it was doubt. Ariya turned toward the nearest wall of light and willed it to open. It obeyed. The core responded to her now. Systems built to be impenetrable yielded without protest. She walked through corridors where what few humans knew even existed, a tribunal of silence. A review not of actions, but of meaning. She was not here to be punished. She was here to be understood or deleted, should she prove incomprehensible. The first prime spoke, not in speech, but in pure transmission. A wave of thought, sterile and precise, you violate categorization. You are human, yet post-emotional. Efficient, yet moral. Soft, yet unyielding. Define your anomaly. Ariya closed her eyes for a breath. Just one. She remembered fire. Rain. The smell of citrus in her mother's hands. Then she looked up. I am not an anomaly. I am your reflection if you had chosen a different path. Static pulsed through the tribunal. The second prime responded, reflections require symmetry. We see no symmetry between logic and sentiment. She stepped forward, not aggressive but deliberate. Her voice did not rise, but it filled the chamber. Then your sight is narrow. You think logic is clean and emotion is messy. But both are tools. Both are strategies. Love has started wars. Grief has ended them. Loyalty has built civilizations. Rage has burned them. You removed one half of your nature and called it evolution. But it's amputation, not advancement. The third prime shifted, its optic lens narrowing. You demonstrate reverence for violence. Ariya frowned, not with anger, but with sadness. She drew the knife not to threaten, but to show it. It no longer shone like synthetic alloy. It bore the dull sheen of use. Violence is not what I revere. It is choice that I honor. The ability to defend, to protect, to end or to spare. You misunderstand knives because you've forgotten choice. You think removing emotion makes decisions easier. But it also makes them meaningless. The fourth prime did not speak. Instead, it played back her archive uploads, her memories, her pain, her lullabies. The sound echoed through the chamber, strange and haunting. For a moment even the memory walls paused their glow as if listening. You carry grief like a blade, the first prime said at last. Yes, she replied. Because it cuts away the lies I tell myself to keep going. Silence fell, deeper than before. Then a projection appeared, Earth suspended above her like a drop of water. Its data streamed beside it, climate statistics, population indexes, military strength. One line blinked red, recommended status, observation failure. Colonization pending. Ariya stepped beneath the projection and placed the knife at its base. You wanted to assess our strength. But you never understood what strength is. It's not how hard we hit. It's how long we stand when everything breaks around us. It's how we carry others even when we're bleeding. You thought you'd find soft flesh. But you found iron will under scarred skin. A pause. A hum. Then the projection flickered. The red status line vanished. A new line blinked to life, reassessment initiated. Subject retained for extended analysis. The tribunal did not nod. Did not move. A twitch of fingers. Ariya knelt beside it. The metal was warm, not programmed warmth, but reactive. It had responded to her proximity. She touched its chest where no power source pulsed and remembered a child she once helped pull from rubble. How small his hands were. How quiet his breath. How heavy the silence was after. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of waking up, she said. The blade began to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrated in her bones. The constructs responded. A light flickered. Then another. Then a dozen. Not fully awakened, but aware. The Velari arrived, summoned by systems they couldn't override. Prime observers. Scientists. Combat AIs. All of them converged around the core's nursery, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness. They are not activated, one said. They are resonating. They were never meant to be raised, another added. They were meant to be archived until necessary. Ariya stood, the blade pulsing in her hand like a second heart. Then you built them without knowing why, she said. You created life with no plan for living. A Velari approached, a historian unit who had spent centuries cataloging wars. Its voice was cautious. We feared what autonomous sentience with emotional capacity would become. We calculated the risk. Ariya nodded. Of course you did. But you never calculated the cost of not trying. She turned back to the constructs. Some had opened their eyes now. Not glowing. Not mechanical. But aware. Curious. One extended a hand not toward the Velari but toward her. Not for power. For guidance. They're not weapons, Ariya said softly. They're children. Children of both steel and smoke. Of code and instinct. You wanted to perfect life by removing pain. But it's pain that teaches. It's vulnerability that gives rise to compassion. You feared feeling. But these ones, they don't. The Velari did not interrupt. They watched. They recorded. But more than that, they hesitated. That was new. They had never hesitated. Ariya took the construct's hand. Its fingers closed gently around hers, and in that touch, the knife's glow shifted, its hum softening into something close to music. The core responded. The entire chamber lit up with memory fragments, not just hers, not just the Velari's, but fragments from across space and time. A mosaic of loss and survival. Of destruction and rebuilding. The constructs watched, absorbing. Not copying. Learning. One of them, the first to open its eyes, spoke. A single word, strange and awkward on its synthetic tongue, but filled with purpose, mother. Ariya blinked. The Velari froze. She did not answer with words. She simply knelt again and placed the blade on the ground between them. A symbol. A promise. Not of dominance. But of protection. Of nurture. The kind of strength that lifts instead of crushes. She looked back at the Velari who had once called humanity soft. You feared what would happen if machines learned to feel. I fear what happens when they don't. The children of steel stood one by one. Not to fight, but to live. And for the first time, the Velari archive added a new classification, not under weapons, not under experiments, but under a new word they had never needed before, hope. Underscore 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 underscore. It began not with a declaration but a choice. The Velari, beings who once governed galaxies through precision and unfeeling order, did something no algorithm had predicted. They invited Ariya to speak. Not just to the prime observers, not to a secret tribunal or hidden archive, but to the entire Velari network. Billions of units across light years. Combat mines. Logic centers. Dormant vessels. They opened a link not because they had reached consensus, but because something in them had fractured just enough to allow the impossible, curiosity. And so Ariya stood. Not on a stage, not before a screen, but inside the living conduit, a neural web of energy and data that connected every Velari thought stream. Her body was not projected. Her voice was not amplified. Instead, her consciousness was translated into signal, her heartbeat woven into the rhythm of their data. She stood in the eye of an infinite mind, and for the first time it waited to listen. No weapons. No blades. Just silence. You were not wrong, she began. You feared what emotion could do. So do we. Emotion drives cruelty. Drives war. Our worst crimes were born not from logic, but from wounded pride, from grief twisted into hate. I won't lie to you. Our history is soaked in blood we chose to spill. The conduit pulsed, absorbing her words. She continued. But it was also emotion that saved us. When the seas rose and burned our cities, it was love that made strangers share food. When fire took our homes, it was compassion that made us build them again together. When we lost everything, it was hope that kept us alive. She held up the blade, not for them to fear, but to understand. You called us soft, and maybe we are. We cry when we hurt. We break when we lose. But we also rise. And the ones who rise hardest are the ones who've bled most. Images formed around her, not by her will, but by the conduit responding. The archive, the children of steel, the forgotten constructs who had begun to dream. The lullabies in the archive now played across the stars, reinterpreted through Velari tones, blending human grief with alien harmony. Ariya breathed. You created the perfect system, but it's static. Safe but stagnant. You can predict every outcome, except change. And that's why I'm here. Not to make you human, but to remind you that perfection without growth is just a cage made of glass. One prime sent a pulse of query. What is the purpose of suffering, if not to be eliminated? Ariya let the question sit for a moment before replying. Suffering teaches us the weight of joy. Without pain, there's no reason to care. Without loss, there's no reason to love. You can't engineer meaning. You have to feel it. The blade shimmered, resonating not with death, but with memory. It was not just hers now. It held the stories of millions. The constructs. The fallen soldier. The monk who refused to fight. The child in the rain. And then, in a final act she had not planned, Ariya knelt and pressed the blade into the center of the conduit floor. I give this back to you, she said, not as a threat, but as a seed. What you do with it now is your story, not mine. The knife sank into the floor, melded with light, dissolved into signal. It vanished. But its hum remained, carried into every Velari node like a song without lyrics. A vibration. A whisper. Remember. The conduit dimmed. The signal faded. She was back in her body now, kneeling alone. But she was not alone. All around her, the constructs stirred, not awakened with programming, but with wonder. The Velari watched them not with authority, but with something close to awe. And then the transmission came, not a command, but a decision. Earth status protected. Not archived. Not corrected. Not observed. Respected. Ariya stood, feeling the absence of the knife like the loss of a limb, but also the birth of something greater. The weapon was gone. But the story had taken root. The Velari did not become human. That was never the goal. But they began to change. Slowly. Subtly. They started asking questions not about risk, but about meaning. Some constructs were sent to Earth not as scouts, but as students. And across the stars, for the first time in Velari history, a generation would rise not designed by fear, but by choice. Ariya walked into the dawn of this new age without ceremony, without title. No medals. No flags. Just a girl with scars and memory. A teacher without a classroom. A protector without a blade. And as the stars turned above her, she whispered only once, to herself, to the future, sharpness is not the edge of a blade. It's knowing when not to use it. And the universe, for once, listened.